Picture this, late night, kitchen light off, just the phone light on her face. She's scrolling, not looking for anything in particular, just scrolling the way you do at midnight when your hands need something to do, and then her thumb stops. There's a voicemail in there, an old one, 47 seconds long. She's had it saved for so many years now that she's actually forgotten the sound of his voice everywhere else in her life. Except here, in this one file. The only place left where he still sounds like himself ends. And here's the strange part. It's not that she kept it. People keep things. What's strange is why she never deleted it, even after the anger passed. Even after she stopped needing anything from him at all, even after she'd already quietly forgiven him. I'll let you hear a small piece of what's in it later, but first, you need to know how a 47-second voicemail ends up being the last thing standing between a woman and the version of herself that used to carry his name around like I'm Clara. And this is a closure session. Let's begin. There's a moment she still thinks about. Not the day he left. She's made a kind of peace with that day mostly. It's a different one, years later, her thumb hovering over the delete button on that voicemail. Hovering there for what felt like a very long time, and then not pressing it. I'll get to that moment, but first, you should know how she got there. You should know what that voicemail actually was, what he did to earn a place in it, and maybe most importantly, what it cost her to keep it that long without ever once playing it all the way through. It started, like most of these stories do, with something small that turned out not to be small at all. She found out the way people usually find out, sideways. Not a confession, a slip, a name mentioned by someone who didn't know it would land like it did. And once she knew, she couldn't unknow it. The way you can't unhear a sound once your ears already caught it, and he didn't deny it for long. That part, at least, she'll give him. But he also didn't explain it, not really. He gave her the outline of the betrayal without ever handing her the reasons underneath it. And the outline wasn't the hard part. The hard part was the shape of the silence, where the reasons should have been. For a while, she thought that silence was something she could wait out, that if she just stayed steady long enough, he'd eventually say the thing that would make it make sense. People do that. They mistake waiting for patience. 3 weeks before the voicemail arrived, she was still sleeping on his side of the bed some nights without meaning to. She'd wake up there and not remember choosing it. Her body was doing something her mind hadn't agreed to yet, reaching for a version of comfort that no longer existed, so she waited, weeks of it. She'd catch herself checking her phone during ordinary moments, standing in line, brushing her teeth, not really expecting anything, just checking, the way your tongue keeps finding a chipped tooth even after it stops hurting. She kept his mug in the cupboard for 4 months after he was gone. Didn't use it, didn't throw it out either, just let it sit there, a small ceramic hostage to a conversation that never happened. Do you know what the hardest part of waiting is? It usually isn't the big, dramatic grief. It's the small administrative moments. Deciding what to do with a spare key, deciding whether to keep a photo where his arm is around you, cropped just enough that it could pass as a picture of only you. If anyone happened to ask. 1 week before the voicemail, a mutual friend told her gently that he'd already started seeing someone else, not the person the betrayal had been about, someone new entirely. That was the night. She stopped checking her phone quite so much. Something in her understood before her mind fully caught up that whatever she'd been waiting for wasn't coming from that direction anymore. That voicemail, the 47-second one, came right after that. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. It was closer to an attempt at one, his voice lower than usual, saying a handful of things that almost added up to "I'm sorry," without quite committing to the actual words. She played it once the day it arrived. Just once, and then she saved it and never played it again. Do you know what she thought the day she saved it instead of deleting it? She thought, "I'll need this later. For proof. For something." She didn't know yet what the something would turn out to be. That's the first thing worth knowing about that voicemail. Not what was in it, but that even she didn't understand yet why she was keeping it. Months passed, then a year. The anger didn't leave all at once. It thinned the way fog does, patch by patch, until one ordinary Tuesday she realized she'd gone a whole week without thinking about him first thing in the morning. That used to feel unimaginable. Now it was just Tuesday. She started noticing smaller signs of it, too. She could hear his name at a dinner party and not feel her stomach drop. She could pass the restaurant where it had ended and feel only the mildest, most distant kind of static. The emotional equivalent of an old skirt forget is there, until your hand happens to brush over it. You'd think that would have been the end of the story. It wasn't. Around the 10-month mark, she almost called him, just once. She'd convinced herself that particular evening, that one real conversation, hearing his voice live, not recorded, would finally give her the missing piece. She got as far as his name on the screen. Thumb over the call button this time, not the delete button. She pictured exactly how it would go. Him apologizing properly, finally, in full sentences instead of 47 seconds. Her forgiving him out loud, cleanly, and the whole thing lifting off her chest in one conversation, the way it does in the version of this story she used to imagine. She made the call. It did not go that way. He was polite, a little distant. He said he was sorry, again, in roughly the same handful of words as before. And then the conversation drifted, awkwardly, almost immediately, into small talk about nothing, the way conversations do when neither person actually knows what to say next. She hung up 10 minutes later feeling worse, not better. Not because he'd said anything cruel, because nothing had actually happened. No lightning bolt release, no door swinging open. Just two people who used to matter enormously to each other, talking about the weather. That was the night she quietly stopped believing the explanation was ever going to be the thing that freed her. Not because he refused to give her one, because she'd finally gotten a version of one, and it hadn't done what she needed it to do. The relief she was waiting for had never been sitting on the other end of that phone call at all. That night she went home and found herself opening that old voicemail again. Not to play it, just to look at the little gray icon of it sitting in her messages. And she understood something new about why she'd kept it. It wasn't proof that he owed her anything anymore. It had quietly become something closer to a marker of a before and after. The line between the version of her who thought an explanation would save her, and whatever came next. She didn't know yet what would come next. She just knew standing there that the voicemail had already started, meaning something different than it used to. She also noticed that same week that she'd stopped rehearsing the conversation she used to imagine having with him, the one where he finally understood out loud everything he'd cost her. She used to run that conversation in her head on long drives, in the shower, in the quiet minute before sleep. It had simply stopped showing up. She hadn't decided to let it go. It had just, at some point, run out of anything left to prove. Because here's the part that used to confuse her, and honestly confused me a little too, the first time I heard this story. If the anger was thinning, if she was already, in most ways, healing, why did she still have that voicemail? Why hadn't she deleted it the day she stopped needing it as proof of anything at all? That's the question sitting underneath everything that happens next. Hold on to it. But the moment that actually changed everything for her, the one I mentioned back at the very beginning, her thumb over that delete button, hadn't happened yet. Not for a long while still. It's worth pausing here, just for a moment, on him. Not to excuse anything, but because closure, real closure, sometimes asks you to see the other person as a full, complicated human being instead of only the shape of what they did to you. He wasn't thinking about her most days by this point. That's not cruelty particularly. It's just how most people move through their own lives forward, rarely looking back at the wreckage they leave behind in someone else's evenings. He told himself a version of the story where it wasn't as bad as it actually was. People do that too. It's how they keep functioning without having to sit with what they cost someone else. He had no idea a small file was still sitting in her phone. 2 years on, he probably assumed, if he thought of her at all, that she'd deleted it the week it arrived. The way most people would have. He wasn't carrying the voicemail around. He wasn't carrying much of anything. If she's honest with herself about it, that used to be its own kind of wound, the unfairness of it, that he got to move on lightly while she carried the weight for both of them. He never found out any of what you're about to hear. That's important. Whatever happens in the rest of this story, it doesn't happen because he ever learns anything, or apologizes properly, or comes back to ask. This isn't a story about him being told he's forgiven. It never becomes that story. It was never going to be that story back to her 2 years in, almost to the week. She was cleaning out her phone. New one on the way. Old storage full of nothing important, except tucked at the very bottom of an old messages folder, that voicemail, 47 seconds. Still there. This was the moment, the one from the very beginning of tonight's story. Her thumb hovering over delete. And here's what she realized, standing in that kitchen, phone light on her face, the rest of the apartment dark around her. She wasn't hovering there because she still needed him to be sorry. She was hovering there because at some point, she couldn't even say exactly when, she'd already forgiven him. Quietly, privately, with no ceremony and no witness, and she'd done it without his help. Without an explanation, without ever needing him to know it had happened at all. That's the part that used to confuse her, remember? Why keep a voicemail from someone you've already forgiven? And here finally was the answer. She wasn't keeping him. She was keeping proof of what she'd done, not what he'd said in those 47 seconds. She barely remembered the exact words by then. What she was keeping was the marker, the place on the map where she'd stopped waiting for an apology and started healing without one. She let herself hear a few seconds of it right then, for the first time in 2 years. Not the whole thing, just enough. His voice lower than usual, saying something that almost sounded like sorry. And what struck her wasn't sadness, it was distance. The voice belonged to someone she used to know very well and didn't need anymore, not because she'd erased him from her life, because she'd outgrown the need for anything from him at all. His apology, his explanation, his acknowledgement that any of it had cost her something. You'd think, once she understood all that, deleting it would have been easy. It wasn't. Not right away, and that surprised her too. She sat with the phone in her hand for a long minute, and slowly understood that the decision to delete it or keep it didn't actually matter anymore. The file wasn't holding any power over her either way. That in itself was the proof she'd been looking for without knowing it. She didn't delete the voicemail that night in the end. But she also didn't need to keep it, not really, and that's the difference. She wasn't holding on to him. She was holding a small, finished thing. A closed door she didn't need to open again, but didn't feel any urgency to lock either. This was the turn her whole healing had been quietly building toward for 2 years. Closure was never something he was going to hand her. It was something she made on her own out of nothing but time, and the decision, made privately on an ordinary night, with no one watching, to stop waiting for him to earn a peace she was already capable of giving herself. If you're here tonight, maybe there's a version of this waiting inside you too. Maybe there's someone who owes you an explanation they're never going to give. Someone whose silence still sits in a room in your chest, taking up space, waiting to be filled with words that may never come. I want you to hear this clearly. You do not need them to know you've forgiven them for the forgiveness to be real. You don't need a phone call. You don't need a message. You don't need them to understand what it cost you or to apologize in the specific way you always imagined. Forgiveness that depends on someone else's participation isn't actually forgiveness. It's just another form of waiting, dressed up to look finished. Maybe you've been keeping your own version of that voicemail. A saved message. An old photo you tell yourself is just there for practical reasons. A drawer you haven't opened in a year, but haven't emptied either. It's alright if you have. It doesn't mean you haven't healed. Sometimes the object stays quietly, long after the need for it has already gone. The relief you're looking for was never on the other end of an explanation. It was always something you were going to have to build yourself out of whatever pieces you had, even the unfair, unfinished, unexplained ones, even the ones nobody ever apologized for properly. You are allowed to let this be over, even without their permission, even without their knowledge, even if they never fully understand what they did, or what it cost you, or how long you carried it after they'd already put it down. Your healing was never something they were required to sign off on. Let your shoulders drop, if they haven't already. Whatever you're still holding on to, waiting for someone else to release you from, you're allowed to set it down yourself. Tonight, quietly, the way she did. No ceremony required, no witness needed but you. That's a different kind of story. By the way, the one about the phone call that doesn't fix anything might be one I tell another night. For tonight, just know this. Somewhere, tonight, without any fanfare, someone forgave someone who never even knew they needed it. And it worked anyway. It's allowed to work for you too. Good night. I'm glad you were here tonight.
Goodbye. Take care. Sleep well.